All right, there we go. So, for those of you who wonder, is this now a different conference? Why are we writing desktop applications now? Don't worry, because we're going to write them with PHP. Now, the obvious question that probably some of you have is, why on earth should we use PHP to write a desktop application? And it's a fair question. And I don't have the right answer to it. I have a couple of answers that I think are valid. And one of them is, we can, I guess, which is fine. But in honesty, I think it's good if we can give people who work with PHP, so basically everyone who's now sitting here, the ability to create a desktop application with their existing knowledge, usage of frameworks. I think that's just great to just extend what you already can do with a language and then explore and go from there. And, well, sort of besides that, I like to do more of the weird things with PHP. So, I wrote Expose, which is like a fully open source version of something like ngrok. So it allows you to share your local URLs and then share and tunnel them via Expose, and then you can share those URLs with others. The client is built entirely in PHP. The server is built entirely in PHP. So I like to do more of the weird things with PHP, and, well, building desktop apps is one of those things, I guess. My name is Marcel Pociot. I'm the CTO at Beyond Code, which is kind of a fancy way of saying I'm one of the co-owners of this 3-people company. And we create software tools for PHP developers, software tools for people who work with PHP and Laravel in particular. So, for example, we created Laravel Herd, if you have heard about it, no pun intended, which is like a great way to get started with PHP and onboard you into Laravel and PHP in general. And feel free to follow me on X if that's your thing. Now, one of the applications that we built at Beyond Code is called Tinkerwell. Don't worry, it's not going to be an ad. And this is like the very first screenshot that I shared of this. This app was built in Swift, and it sort of allows you to use something like PsyShell or PHP Artisan Tinker in a GUI application. So you can write some PHP code, you can run it in the context of your application. As I said, I wrote the very first version of this app in Swift, and shortly after releasing the app, a lot of people asked us, well, this is cool, but we're not on Mac. We want to use this on Windows, or we want to use this on Linux. But the application was written in Swift, so my immediate reaction was not the best one, and I thought, well, I'm just going to rewrite the app 2 more times natively for Windows and for Linux. And as I said, we're only 3 people at Beyond Code, so this wasn't really a good choice, because it would mean that we would have to maintain multiple code bases of our application. Every new feature that we would introduce, we would have to rebuild it for each different platform. So I started looking, this was like 5-6 years ago, I started looking at alternatives, how we can have one single code base and then basically ship this to different operating systems. And back then, those were the main popular solutions, and this is probably still the case. So we have Tauri and we have Electron. And Tauri allows you to write your desktop applications in a combination of Rust and JavaScript. So Rust is used sort of for the back-end code of your desktop application, and then the front end is sort of a combination of JavaScript and HTML. And, well, Electron is JavaScript only plus HTML. And back at the time, Tauri wasn't even a 1.0 release, and I don't know anything about Rust. It's way out of my comfort zone, so to say. So for me, the decision was clear. I wanted to go with Electron to build desktop applications. Now, before we go, and I'll show you how we can introduce PHP into this mix, I first want to give you an overview of how an Electron lifecycle looks like. So if we start an Electron application, this is basically what happens. So we start an application like Discord or VS Code or Tinkerwell, and the Electron app basically spawns two processes. So the first one is called the main process, or sometimes referred to as the background process. And it's written in JavaScript, and it allows you to communicate using the Electron API with things like Node.js functionalities, so you have access to the file system, to the crypto library if you want to do something with that. We can make use of native UI elements. So for example, we can add something to our dock, to the menu bar. We can change things in the actual menu of our application. And we have access to the operating system, such as Touch ID, for example. And then this main process spawns another process, which is the renderer process. And well, in terms of Electron, this is basically just a Chromium browser that starts and then renders some HTML with JavaScript. And then if we want to communicate between those processes, we have to do some inter-process communication, which isn't really that easy with Electron. So for example, if you want to click on a button that shows a file picker, then the renderer has the button. When you click on it, it would need to communicate with the main process, where we open the file dialog. When the user selects a file, that one gets sent back to the renderer. So there's a lot of communication going on then. But that's like the main idea of how Electron applications work in general. Now, I wanted to bring PHP into this mix. So how would this look like? Well, it's actually relatively easy. So we still have this main process that starts with Electron. We can't do anything about this. This is just how Electron works under the hood. But now, our main process basically spawns another process instead of just the renderer. So we basically run something like PHP artisan serve, or if you're not that familiar with Laravel, it's like a built-in PHP web server, which gives us a URL pointing to our local PHP application, which is cool. So we can take this URL, give it to our renderer, and say, don't render this local HTML file, but just show us the URL of our PHP-based application. So then we basically have a desktop application that is running a browser showing us our PHP application. And if we want to communicate from PHP with the main process, we can just do this with some kind of lightweight HTTP API. So then we can still access all the native UI elements. We can access any operating system stuff like Touch ID, etc., from PHP by having this kind of approach. But this introduces a couple of problems. So let's say I write an application, like an actual desktop application with this, and I use PHP, and I want to ship this and give my app to you. Then I would need to tell you, well, do you have PHP installed in the first place? Because you need it to run my app. Then I need to make sure, let's say I'm using PHP 8.3, that you have 8.3 installed as well. Maybe I'm using extensions that you don't have installed. I need to tell my application users all this list of things that they need to have installed in order to use my application, or any settings, all that setup. And that's really annoying, and that was like one of the main blockers. So how can we avoid that, but still use PHP? And the idea to this is actually pretty simple. We just ship PHP along with our desktop application. So we're basically using a statically compiled binary of PHP that has everything included in just one single file. And this is also what works behind the scenes, what FrankenPHP does, or Laravel Herd. So it's just one single binary with everything included. It's only 21 megabytes. At least if you're working with Electron, that's lightweight. So it's not that bad. And by doing that, we have full control over the whole process, because we can decide which version of PHP do we want to bundle with our app, which extensions do we want to bundle, which ini settings do we want to bundle. So everything is just included in this one single file, and it has everything built in that we need to run like a default Laravel application. And this idea is what we have built into what is called NativePHP. So NativePHP is a Laravel package that allows you to create desktop applications with PHP. And if I say we, then that's me and Simon Hamp, who's sitting here. That's why I'm going to show you how we can make use of this in an actual application. So let's jump into the IDE and see how this works. So, as I said, it's a Laravel package. Now, if you may think, well, why is it Laravel specific? The reason is quite simple. I'm using Laravel, Simon is using Laravel, and we need to hook so many things into the framework to just make this work seamless that it was way easier to do this with a Laravel-based package than doing it a framework independently. It works in theory, but we just haven't put in the work to provide it for something like Symfony yet. So if you want to get started with this in a Laravel application, it's just a composer require way. So you would do something like composer require NativePHP / and then just like I had the decision and was able to choose, should I use Electron or should I use Tauri, you can basically do the same thing with soon with NativePHP. So as of right now, we have only an Electron driver, so we can do something like require NativePHP Electron. But Simon especially is working hard on the Tauri implementation of this, which will bring a whole lot of benefits compared to the Electron approach, because it will not spawn an actual HTTP server, but it will communicate with PHP directly via the C library, which is really exciting. So as of right now, you would just do composer require NativePHP Electron. I already did this because I want to spare you the excitement of seeing composer run. And then once that's done, we can run PHP artisan native install. And this is then going to do all the setup work for us. It's going to download the NPM dependencies, it's going to download Electron, and it's also going to publish a configuration file and a service provider. So I already did this as well. And once that's done, we are basically ready to go and start working on our application just like we would work with a traditional Laravel app. So we can run PHP artisan native surf, and just like running PHP artisan surf, this basically starts up our application in this sort of development mode. So now we have already the DevTools open, just like we would in a regular browser, and we have this little native application window, and we have our dock icon that is the NativePHP logo. And, well, this already shows us the title of our app, and then we have basically the Laravel homepage of my application. And what's interesting about this is, if we take a look at the PHP version, this is currently using PHP 8.1 in this demo, but I'm using locally PHP 8.3. So this is not using the PHP version that I have installed locally, but it's already using the PHP version that we bundle. So this is basically the same thing as you would do when you would then ship this application to an actual user. Now let's see how we can make some modifications to this. So as I said, we have this service provider. And if you're familiar with Laravel, then this might look a bit different than your traditional service provider because it doesn't extend from Laravel's service provider. And the way that this native app service provider works is once Electron, in this case, or once the native application part is ready to go, once we have started the PHP web server, we will call this boot method, and in here you can then configure how your application should start up. So for example, you could put global key bindings in here, you can define how the window should open, how the menu should behave, things like that. So by default, this just does window open, and this is what we get. So we make a couple of assumptions here. So for example, the title of your window will be the title of your Laravel application, the one that you have in your environment or config file. Then, as I said, we by default show the home page of your Laravel application. And we can customize this by making some adjustments and just chain methods on this window open call. So for example, we can say we want to change the width of our window to, I don't know, 250, and the height should be 300, or let's say 400 to make it easier to see. Then if I save, we have hot reloading in place, so my application automatically restarts, and now the default width and height of my window has changed as well. Now, one problem is we can still make this like super small, so let's fix this as well. And we can just add a minimum width of 200 and, a minimum height of, let's say, 300. Save this. And with this very fluent API, we can then define the behavior of our window. And now I'm no longer able to make this window smaller. What else we can do is especially useful for this talk. We can say that the window should be always on top, like that. And let's change the title as well and say title should be Hello London. All right, so one annoying thing about this, especially this hot reloading, is that the window will always come back in the center of my screen. And from a user perspective, I kind of want this to remember where I last put it. So if I resize the window and move it to somewhere on the right, like this, the next time I open my application, I would expect, from a user perspective, I would expect it to reopen at the exact same position, the exact same width, the exact same height. So with NativePHP, we can just chain another method call in here called rememberState. And now it remembers the application state that we last set it to. So if I'm now, I don't know, position it like this, and then we trigger hot reloading again by changing the title, my application restarts, and now it just remembered where I last put the window and then reopened it in the exact same way. And there are a lot of more things that you can do and customize the window. So for example, like on macOS, you can remove the title bar, you can change the background opacity, and you can also open different routes or URLs. So if I have a different route that I want to open instead of just the home page, I can just define this here. So I already created this dialog route, which is currently just a blank page. So this is basically then the entry point of my desktop application. And there are basically two kinds of apps. So we have applications that have actual windows, like this one here. And then we have applications that only live in the menu bar. So for example, like Tuple or CleanShot or Herd. And we can do these kind of applications with NativePHP as well. So just like we do the window open call, we can create a menu bar application. So just by calling menu bar create, we now have this NativePHP icon here, and it pretty much behaves the same way as a window. So when I click on this, we see another browser window, basically, that opens my PHP application. And again, by default, this is the home page of my app. And we can change this as well, just like we changed the window. So for example, we say that this should have a different width. It should have a different height, something like that. And the route should be the menu bar. Again, we have hot reloading, and if we click, we just have basically a different URL, a different route of my Laravel application being displayed in the menu bar. So that's really easy to create this kind of application as well. One thing you might notice is that now the dock icon for my application is gone. And that's kind of something that we made by choice, because if you only want to create a menu bar application that does not have a window, that's like the default behavior that you would expect. You don't want to have a dock icon in this case. But if you have like a combination, you want to show the dock icon, so we can just add the showDockIcon method on here, and now, well, my dock icon still remains visible, and I have my menu bar icon up top, and now I have like a combination of these things in my app. Now, the next thing I want to show you is we want to build something like a settings screen. And usually this works by, we have our menu up here, and if I click on the first entry, we would have something like preferences or settings, and if I click on this, a new window goes up. So how can we do this with NativePHP? Well, we can also customize the menu. So we can just create a new menu, and the first entry would be a submenu with the label PHP UK. And then as a second argument, we basically provide the actual submenu. So we have, let's say, a label that says Hello London. Then we have a separator. And then we have the option to quit our application. And like that, you can just configure your native actual menu. And once you're done with that, we can just call the register method, which tells our application that this is the menu that we want to register with this application. So if we save this, we now only have this one entry up here, which says PHP UK. There we have Hello London and the option to quit our application. Now, as you see, all the other options are gone, which are like the default ones, like editing, copy-pasting text. So we want to re-add them. Of course, you could just manually do that, but we can also make use of some methods that do that for us. So for example, here we have like the file menu. We can just add this, or the edit menu, the view menu, and the window menu. So just by chaining these methods, and you can also just reorder them however you want, we can then build up our native application menu like that. So now we want to add an entry to this first submenu that says something like preferences or settings, and when we click on it, we want to actually open up a window. And the way this would work, like in a traditional JavaScript application, is you click on this, it dispatches an event, then we listen for this click event, and then open up a new window. And that's basically what we do in NativePHP as well. So we can add a special kind of item to our menu that is of type event. And when we click on this, this event that we pass in here will then be dispatched within our Laravel application. So this would be the settings clicked event that we dispatch. Then we can define the actual title of our menu item. So let's say it's preferences. And then we can also define a hotkey that we want to register along with this. So by default on a macOS, this would be Command or Control and comma. So let's save this. There we go. So now we have this preferences icon entry in here, which has the shortcut assigned to it as well. And if we click on this, well, our event got dispatched, but we're not listening for this yet. So now to make this work, we can just start listening for this event. And this, just to show you, is just a plain Laravel event. There's nothing special about this. It's just as you would write your Laravel application. It's just one event class that we can listen for. So if we now go to our event service provider, we can start listening for this event and say, listen for the settings clicked event. And when this was clicked, well, what do we want to do? We want to open up a new window that shows us a different URL, basically. So we can call the window facade and say we want to open the window, and the route should be settings. Now, one important thing about this, if you have multiple windows, is that you need to pass an ID when you open up a window. And I'll show you why in a second. So let's say that this is called settings as well. All right, and let's also give this a title, settings. There we go. So now, if I click, the event gets dispatched. I have another tab from my developer tools, and we have this new settings window open. And just like we did in the service provider, we can totally customize the width, the height, and whatnot of this specific window. Now, the ID of this window is important because let's say I have the settings window already open. I'm currently focusing my main window, and I re-click on this preferences. Then NativePHP now knows a settings window already exists because we gave it this ID, so it just switches the focus to the already open window, and it's not recreating an actual new one. So if we now close this, and I press the shortcut, then we have the settings window open back up again. OK, cool. So now in the settings, it's just a simple drop-down where we can change the background color. And I want to now implement some very basic functionality for my application. So I want to be able to change the color and do basically two things. First off, when I change the color, I want to persist this setting somewhere. So when I reopen my window, it should, if I switch this to green, it should still say green the next time I reopen that. And the next thing I want to do is, well, the default behavior that I would expect from a desktop application is, if I switch the background color, it should change this window's color in real time as I change the setting. So there's no reloading, pressing Command-R in desktop applications. So let's see how we can make this work. And as Freek showed you in the keynote, we are using Livewire for this. So as Freek said, it's basically allowing you to use something like a reactive state management in PHP. You don't need to use Livewire with NativePHP. It's just that it works perfectly together because I don't need to write JavaScript, which is kind of nice. But you can use NativePHP with just plain blade views if you want. You can also use just Vue or JavaScript for your front end. You're not limited. I'm just using Livewire for this demo. So if we go to this settings component, this is what it looks like. So we have this component, and we have a public property called color. And when we mount the component, so this is basically when my component gets displayed and is ready to go, we make use of the settings facade that we ship with NativePHP that gives you basically a little key value store to store these kind of settings. So when we mount the component, we just populate this color property with the color key from my settings. So we basically pull out the settings that were stored. If there isn't any settings stored, we just use the default one, which is white in this case. And then if we update the color, so this is like a magic method from Livewire, so that every time we change the color property using the dropdown, this method will be called automatically by Livewire. And all we're doing here is we basically just set the new value in this key value store to our color. So just by doing that, we should already be able to change this color to green. Then I'm closing the setting. Let's reopen it. And now it's green again, because when we open the window, we're pulling the setting from this key value store. All right, so that's already done. Now, how can we communicate this setting change to the other window? And if you think about how you would do this in like a traditional web application, if you think that these are two individual tabs in your browser, the way we could communicate between the windows is by using something like WebSockets. So we need to have some sort of real-time communication because this window had a request, and this is the response. So there's no like concurrent connection available for us to dispatch any events back and forth. And it works, in fact, with WebSockets, but we can do it even a bit simpler with NativePHP because we have this little wrapper of Electron under the hood. So if we go to this component that we show right here, it's called the dialog component, then you can already see that we also have a color property. So I already have hooked up that we want to show a color. And we also have a method that we can update the color whenever it changes. We just need to still basically listen for some kind of event. And Livewire allows us to listen for events. But as I said, the problem is there is no concurrent connection. So if we would listen for an event, we would need to manually reload and refresh our browser, basically, to trigger that. So what we can do is we can use a special keywords called native. So we can listen for an event. And as we're using the settings facade, this one dispatches automatically an event every time some key in the setting key value store changes. So we can listen for the setting changed event. And once this changes, we want to call this updated settings method. So every time we change something in the dropdown from our settings, the settings will be written to the key value store. This is going to dispatch this event. We can then listen for this event basically in real time by using this native keyword on top of it. And once we do that, we call this method, which just retrieves the new payload, so the new color that we set in our settings, and then We store this in this property, and because we're using Livewire, we basically have free hot reloading, because then Livewire takes care of re-rendering our view. So now, if I'm going to change this, we can now dispatch the event and listen for this in the other window in real time, which I think is really cool. And again, it didn't require us to write any single line of JavaScript. Woo. OK, cool. So the next thing I want to show you is something that is really not doable with a traditional web application. And I want to build something like a screenshot tool. So I want to be able to select the window. When I hover my mouse, I want to highlight the window that is currently selected. Then I want to be able to click on the window. And because I wanted to push my luck, I brought like a thermal printer. So maybe we will even print this, but we'll see what the live demo gods have to say about that. So first of all, let's add some logic to open like a window picker. So if we go to this dialog component, open up the view, and then we're just going to add a new button to it. So let's say pick window. And when we click on this, we want to open a picker. So let's implement this open picker method. So in our dialog component, we add a new method, open picker. Now, what does this actually do? If we have this sort of functionality where we have the screenshot tool, the way this actually works is there's like a full width, full height, transparent window on top of everything. And when we move our mouse around, the window detects the current active window that is underneath the cursor, and then it just places a rectangle at the exact same coordinates with some background color. And that's what we want to do as well. So we want to open a new window that we give a different ID, which is the picker. And then I have already created a macro, because there's a lot going on in this, called picker. So let me show you what this picker macro does. So in my app service provider, I have this macro, because, well, writing this would be a lot. So as I said, these window pickers basically put a transparent window on top of everything. So we're making use of the screen facade that we ship with NativePHP to get an array of all the displays, like the physical displays connected to the computer. For this demo, I'm just going to use the first one because I don't have multiple connected. And then we can, in this macro, just use the same methods as we would on the window itself. So we give this window a title. We're going to open a specific URL. So this is like the picker URL. The width of my window is, well, it's the width of my display. The height is the height of my display. The window should be transparent. It should be always on top of everything else. We want it to be focusable. It needs to be closable, because we want to even close it just by using an API. Except first mouse is kind of a weird one. This basically allows us to listen for mouse move events. It should be frameless. It could be larger than the actual screen. We don't want it to be minimizable. We don't want it to be resizable. It should not be movable. It should not have a shadow. And the title bar is hidden. So a lot of stuff, but I think with that API, it's still very readable to understand what is actually going on in here. So that's what the picker macro does. And if I reload here, we have this button. Now, if I click on this, it would be not as good, because I would get like a giant 404 sitting on top of everything else that I couldn't close, because it's not closable by a button, because the title bar is hidden. So we have to implement that logic first. So let's add this picker route. So I'm going to add a new route to my application called picker. And in here, we are going to point this to another Livewire component. So we will create a Livewire component called picker, and then point this to our route, like that. Now, in our picker component, we render a view, which is basically what we see once we click on this, and this picker opens up in full time. And what we want this to do is, well, it should have the height of the screen. It should have the width of our screen. And then we can use these live wire events, basically. So we can say, when we move the mouse, we want to get the highlighted window of the current cursor position. So get highlighted window, like that. So let's add this method. So to get the highlighted window, we want to store this in like a property called highlighted window. And to get it, I'm cheating a bit because I already wrote this. We're making use of the getHighlightedWindow method on this window highlighter class, and I'm showing you what this does. So, to get the current highlighted window, we're making use of another facade that we give, or class that we give with NativePHP, the screen facade, which we use to get the current cursor position. Then we get an array of all the currently active windows, and I'm putting that in a cache for a couple seconds, because otherwise, every millisecond I move my mouse around, it would get the currently active windows, and we don't need that. So we're caching that. And then we have the cursor position, and we have the array of active windows. So then we can just return the first window that is not the window picker itself, because it sits on top of everything else, and we would otherwise always highlight the window picker window. So we ignore that, and then we get the first window that is in the boundaries of my cursor position. And then we just return it. All right, so then we have this in this highlighted window property. And now in our view, we can basically check if we have a highlighted window. Well, we want to show some div at the exact same position where my window underneath is. So I have created a little snippet for that. So we show this div. When we click on the div, we want to select it, which actually takes the screenshot and then closes the picker. The highlight window is absolutely positioned. Let's change this to like blue. So we want to have this blue-like background, just like we have with the default screenshot utility. And then we have some styling to apply the top, left, width, and height. So the position and the width and height of this div should be the same one as for the actual window that I have selected. And then for the content, we just show the title of the window. OK, so the last missing piece is the ability to select the window. So if we add this, selecting a window, what it would need to do is, well, we want to take a screenshot. So we can do this by using window highlighter, take screenshot of the highlighted window, and then we need to close the window again, because otherwise our picker would still be open. So we can just use the window facade, call close, and then NativePHP automatically closes. Like, we could pass an ID in here, but NativePHP just knows if we don't pass anything in there, it just closes the current active window. All right, and taking a screenshot is really simple. I'm just basically running a command line script, screen capture, which is pre-installed on macOS. We give it the ID of the window, and then we store that screenshot in our clipboard and basically create the screenshot without a shadow. All right. So with a bit of luck, this should now all work if I click on this. So I can open the window picker, and there we go. So now we have this window sitting on top. I can move the mouse around and highlight different windows. I have the title in there. One thing you might notice is that the coordinates are slightly shifted. So it's a bit more downwards than it should be. And that's because by default, we would now need to detect if the menu bar is visible. And the height of the menu bar, we would need to subtract that from the window position. But you get the idea. Now if I click, our window was closed, OK? And we should have the screenshot in our clipboard. So next up, let's display what we have in our clipboard, because we have access to that too in NativePHP. So if we go to our dialog component, where we have this open picker window, let's just display it here. So we can say if we have something in our clipboard, we want to show an image, And the source of this image would just be the clipboard content. And now we need to provide that content to the view. So we can do this in our dialog component. We can add another function called getClipboardProperty. So this is, if you're familiar with Vue.js or React, this is sort of like a computed property. And in here, we can make use of the clipboard facade that we ship with NativePHP, and this one allows us to get access to any image that is in the clipboard, or also any text or HTML. If you pass a parameter to these methods, you can also set the value of the clipboard. So we're just interested in the clipboard content. So like that. Now let me reload here. That worked great, right? What did I miss? Clipboard. Should just work. Live demos, right? We could fix this. That's why we have an hour-long slot, don't worry. Maybe it's no longer in there. There we go. Maybe, I think I just copied some text that removed the image from my clipboard, and that's why it was no longer there. OK, so there's now our image. And if I select a different one, this one is now in my clipboard, but we don't see the new image in that window immediately. And we can fix this very easily with Livewire. So we can just say in our dialog view, Livewire has the ability to basically poll for changes. So we can say wire poll. And now, in the background, Livewire, the view, is actually going to reload every couple of seconds and see if there are new changes. So if I'm now trying that again, let's pick another screenshot, then the changes get updated in real time automatically. Like that. Cool. All right, so the last missing piece is trying to print this thing. I originally wanted to show you how easy it is to choose a printer using the NativePHP facades, which it is. And you probably knew this because you're smarter than me. I didn't. These little things are not actual printers. These are Bluetooth low-energy printers, so you can't just regularly print to them. So I'm using some weird Python script, but it still works sometimes. So we'll see. Let me turn this thing on. And then we just add a new button that we wire click to a print method. We call it print. Now let's add that method. And, well, apparently these things are called cat printers because, well, they look like a cat. So there is a Python project that allows us to print to these things. So I made a class called catPrinter. And we can just print the clipboard property and pass it to this catPrinter thing. And the way this works is, well, the clipboard content is basically just a base64 encoded image. So we just take that image, store it into an actual file. And then I'm going to run this Python script, give it the file name of the screenshot, and then every output that this Python script generates, we're going to use the info helper from Laravel to just log it to our log file. And now, if I click here, oh, Python. That's what I meant. All right, we don't. Once again, the part about the clipboard. There was no image, right? So print. And it's printing. Cool. And what's really nice about this, in my printer, we had these info calls that would usually write to Laravel's log file. But with NativePHP, we just redirect everything that would get written to the log file to the DevTools. So we just see the output of these logs in the DevTools, which I think is really cool. So yeah, with a couple lines of PHP, we now created a little desktop application that can change the background color in real time. We can have a window picker. We can take screenshots. We can even print screenshots. And that's pretty much the demo that I have for you. NativePHP has a ton of things that I didn't have the time to show you. So you can create file picker dialogues. You can ask the user to select like files or folders. We have access to system APIs like Touch ID. We have full database support, which is really cool. So if you use something like Laravel models and Eloquent and store them, have migration, it all just works out of the box. So we create a SQLite database for you. We run migrations every time your application starts. This is all handled for you. NativePHP has full support for queuing. So if you have any long-running tasks, you can just push it to a queue as you would do with your web application. And then we have a queue worker running in the background that processes them. We have support for the scheduler, so if you have some tasks that you want to run like every minute or even every couple of seconds, just add it to your console kernel as you would with Laravel. It will just work. We have a auto updater that is included in NativePHP. It currently supports GitHub, AWS S3, and DigitalOcean Spaces. Access to the clipboard. You can define global shortcuts to trigger some PHP logic by just listening for events. You have access to notifications. You can create progress bars in the dock icon, context menus, deep linking from one app to your app, which is really powerful. And we dispatch a lot of events that you can listen to, like moving the window around, minimizing the window, maximizing, closing, moving the mouse, all that stuff. And you can just listen to these events in PHP. So that's what I have for you. If you want to learn more about NativePHP, go to nativephp.com. It's entirely open source. Come speak to me during the conference if you have any questions or want to ask something. Simon is also here. I'm just putting you on the spot now. If you want to talk about Tari, go to talk to him as well. And thank you very much.